So we just discovered that different substances have different densities. Table syrup, olive oil, and water have different densities. And we know that the greatest density, the biggest density of these three is the syrup. The least density was olive oil, and the most middle density was water. So let's put that in the middle. Now there's something interesting about density, and it has to do with how much it's able to be buoyant or float above other things. So let's just look. Let's see if we put these things in this glass, how that changes how these things separate. So I started with the oil in the glass. It's that greeny yellow color. I'm going to pour some water into it. What we're going to notice is that the water and the oil, they separate. Which is on the bottom? The water's on the bottom. Which is on the top? The olive oil. Which has the greater density? Water does. So the greater the density, the lower down it's going to be. It's going to sink. The higher the density, it's going to rise. There's something else in that glass too. There's air, right? Air is made of a bunch of different gases: nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide. That's even less dense. Gases, generally speaking, are less dense. Now we're going to add some syrup here, and we know that syrup has approximately 1.37 grams per milliliter. We know that this syrup is the densest, so we'd expect that it would go where? Probably sink to the bottom. So let's pour this in here and see what happens. Where does the syrup end up? Let's put some backlight. The syrup ends up at the bottom. Some of the oil got trapped in the syrup, and notice that it's raising back up to the top. I'm going to stir this up and we're going to see what happens. Let's mix it up. Let's see what happens. Well, those are oil bubbles. You see those little bubbles moving to the top? Yeah. And there's some water pockets moving down a little bit. They're trapped in there. You'll notice that the syrup and the water, they mixed when I stirred. That's probably because syrup is generally a water with a bunch of sugar mixture, so it's soluble in water. So we've just made a substance that's a mixture of the two. So that's why they've kind of combined there. If I leave it for a while, I wonder what might happen. I'll check back in a little bit. So I've left it for a few minutes. Now what's happened is the oil and water line right between it. Those bubbles, they're just slowly separating. The oil's moving up, the water's moving down. At the bottom, there's a little oil trapped that you'll see a bubble go up every so often. But the syrup and the water seem to be combined. So we could do with this with a bunch of other substances. You could try it at home. Just make sure you research whether the different substances are safe to mix. Lots of those ones with the warning labels on them aren't safe to mix, even with some things that you normally would maybe even use in baking. So make sure you do research before you mix anything. But there are a lot of different substances, and the more dense it is, they're going to move to the bottom, and the ones that are the least dense will be closer to the top. And they'll always be in order by density from least to greatest. We'll talk about that more later this unit.